A little later, Nion decided to enter the room next door. She let herself fall onto the bed, feeling trapped in a whirlwind of emotions, trying to ignore what she suspected. However, the sounds coming from the adjacent room grew clearer and more disturbing. She tried to block them out, closing her eyes and forcing herself not to listen, but it was useless. Curiosity and pain mixed with each sound, making her feel even worse. Unable to endure it any longer, the first tear rolled down her cheek, followed by many others. The tears fell as she reluctantly accepted what she had intuited was happening in that room. Her mind spun as she questioned how her oppa, someone she had always admired, could do such a thing. How had he ended up in a situation like that with their teacher? She couldn't understand, and it only deepened the ache in her heart. Trying to convince herself otherwise, Nayeon began inventing excuses in her mind, almost as a form of solace. Maybe they just went to the motel to use the computer, she thought desperately. She repeated it in an attempt to calm herself, even imagining the noises were the result of some intense physical exercise. But each time she clung to these ideas, another sound shook her, causing her to question everything again. Suddenly, a much louder sound came from the room next door. This unexpected noise made Nayeon, in a burst of frustration, kick the wall with her foot. Sadness overtook her again. Soon she began to feel the room heating up alarmingly, as if something was burning. Alarmed and frightened, she went out into the hallway and quickly realized that the hotel was starting to catch fire. Without wasting time, Nayeon began running through the corridor, shouting to alert others, urging them to leave their rooms and get to safety. Panic erupted in the hotel, and people rushed out onto the street. Among the crowd, John and Soyeon also emerged, searching for a safe place to wait. At that moment, the protagonist heard a familiar voice calling his name, with a tone that left no doubt about her anger. He turned slowly, unsure of what to expect, but something inside him already knew who it was. When he turned his head, he spotted a dark silhouette standing out amidst the crowd, a figure he recognized perfectly, even in the dim light. It was Nion. She stood just a few steps away, her head slightly tilted downward but still glancing at them sideways. Her expression was a painful mixture of disappointment and restrained anger. In a near whisper, almost as if talking to herself, she muttered that she would pretend not to have seen what they had done in secret. Her words, loaded with sadness she tried to hide, left Soyeon speechless, as if the weight of the situation had suddenly become much heavier. Unable to hold back any longer, Nayeon stepped forward and, raising her voice, released all the fury and pain she had been bottling up. Between cries, she asked if they had really enjoyed themselves, if everything they had done was worth it. Her words lingered in the air, and for a few moments, no one knew how to respond. Both John and Soyeon remained silent, simply staring at her, aware that any answer might only make things worse. Nayeon, however, was far from finding calm. The irritation on her face was evident, her eyes reflecting the turmoil of emotions she was trying to suppress, but could no longer hide. Her expression said it all, a blend of betrayal and bitterness that she couldn't disguise. For her, what she saw was an image she never imagined she would have to face. And although she tried to hide it, every gesture made it clear what she truly felt. A few days later, John got out of bed a bit later than usual, stretching as he tried to shake off the heaviness that seemed to have settled in his chest since that night. As he went downstairs to the dining room, he found Nion finishing preparing breakfast. He barely greeted her, and Nion only glanced at him without bothering to respond. Her cold, expressionless demeanor made it clear that things had not improved. Annoyed, Nion continued preparing the food mechanically while Yuna observed the scene, not fully understanding the change in her daughter's attitude. The tension was palpable. Even though John tried to appear relaxed, he couldn't ignore the silence that hung between them. Suddenly, Nion grabbed her jacket and, without looking at them, declared irritably that she was leaving for the university ahead of everyone, hinting at her frustration. "Did you guys have a fight?" Yuna asked, intrigued, casting a concerned look at John, hoping for an explanation for her daughter's behavior. With a sigh, John gave a vague response, saying, "Maybe we did," trying to dodge the conversation. But Yuna, unwilling to give up, insisted on knowing what had happened to make Nion so distant. In a casual tone, John replied that they had just had some disagreements in study groups, which was why she was acting that way. Her words, choked with pain, "Why did you do that?" The desperation in her voice left him speechless, unable to offer an answer that could calm the storm of emotions she was feeling. Soyeon, at that moment, placed a hand gently on Nayeon's shoulder, trying to soothe her, but Nion, with a gaze full of anger, pulled away and looked at her with disdain, accusing her of acting as if she were so important, as if she had any right to be there. However, upon looking more closely, she realized she was facing her Aunt Soyeon, and not some rival figure in her confused imagination. Trapped in emotional chaos, she could barely process what was happening and murmured, almost to herself, that her Oppa had been involved with her. The weight of her thoughts was too much, and after a few seconds, her body couldn't take it anymore. She collapsed to the ground, completely fainted, exhausted both physically and emotionally. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more narrations and activate the bell so you don't miss any new episodes. Since that moment, Jong and Nayeon had barely exchanged glances, and the days passed without them saying another word to each other. Though the silence was uncomfortable, a part of him felt that any attempt at conversation would only deepen the wound they both carried. Later, Yang found himself at the university, lost in thought as the hours slipped by almost unnoticed. In his mind, he repeated over and over that he would try to talk to Nayeon during class, trying to find the right words to at least ease the tension that had arisen between them. Occasionally, he glanced across the room, where he could see Nayeon sitting at the far end of the classroom, avoiding any eye contact. Yang let out a slight, frustrated sigh, unable to stop wondering how he should apologize to her or if she would even listen to him. At the front of the classroom, Professor Soyeon was explaining the day's topic, though she quickly noticed Yang's distracted and downcast expression. There was something about his posture that conveyed a kind of sadness, as if he carried a weight he couldn't put down. Aware that something was troubling him, Soyeon continued her lesson but couldn't help but worry about him. When classes ended, Yang gathered his courage and walked toward Nion with firm steps, determined to start a conversation. Nion, however, was already packing up her things, preparing to leave without looking at him. He asked her to give him a few minutes to talk, but Nion, in silence, finished organizing her materials as if his presence didn't matter at all. Without another word, she turned around and began walking toward the exit, avoiding even the slightest interaction. Desperate, Jong raised his voice, telling her to stop pretending to be angry. Those words, far from calming her, only made Nayeon stop abruptly. She turned quickly and, in an impulsive gesture, delivered a hard blow to his groin. The intensity of the hit made him collapse to the ground, writhing in pain, while she walked away without looking back, making her displeasure unmistakably clear. Amid his discomfort, Young felt someone approaching. Looking up, he saw that it was Professor Soyeon. Barely able to get up, he asked her if they could talk, feeling that maybe she could offer some perspective he hadn't considered. In the cafeteria, after ordering him a coffee, Soyeon mentioned that she had spoken with Nayeon in recent days and noticed that something was clearly affecting her. Jong, still worried, asked if during their conversation Nayeon had hit her as well. At this, the professor let out a light laugh and explained that no, she hadn't had any issues. In fact, just offering her some food had calmed Nayeon down. Hearing this, Jong remembered his Aunt Yuna's words about how effective food was at softening Nayeon's mood. For a moment, a small smile crossed his face. It seemed that trick worked after all. Later, the protagonist was running down the street at full speed, trying to get home as quickly as possible while the rain poured down heavily, soaking him. Each step splashed through puddles, and though his clothes were completely drenched, he didn't slow down. Finally, as he crossed the door of his home, he sighed with relief at having escaped the storm. Once inside, his gaze settled on Nayeon, who was in the living room, fully focused on her workout routine. Her movements were precise, and the light sheen of sweat on her skin indicated she had been at it for quite some time. Jong approached her cautiously, observing her with a hint of concern. In a gentle tone, he warned her to be careful, saying he didn't want her to hurt herself by pushing too hard. It seemed those words came at just the right moment because, at that instant, Nayeon felt a sharp cramp in her elbow. She let go of the position she was holding, and her body began to lose balance, falling toward the floor. With quick reflexes, Jong lunged and managed to catch her just in time, holding her in his arms before she hit the ground. Both remained in that position for a few seconds, exchanging intense, silent glances. A faint smile appeared on Nayeon's lips, and she couldn't help but blush slightly. In a whisper, she began to thank him, almost unable to look away. Later that night, after that moment, Yang was in his room, focused on his homework, while the soft hum of the computer filled the space. Hours passed without him noticing, and when he checked the clock, it was already early morning. He finally decided to stop working and settled into his bed to sleep. Soon he began to drift into a peaceful sleep, enjoying the rest he had long awaited. However, in the dim light, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Nayeon, frightened by the rumble of thunder echoing through the night. She sought out her oppa to ask if she could sleep with him. Though a bit surprised, Yang agreed, making room for her on the bed. Both settled in, soon comforted by the warmth of each other's company. Taking advantage of the closeness and the calm moment, Yang asked her in a gentle voice why she had been upset with him lately. In response, Nion lightly touched his back and, with a trembling voice, explained her frustration. She questioned him about what he had done, why he had gotten involved, of all people, with her, the very one from the university. Then, with hesitant gestures, she began to touch him curiously, as if trying to understand why Professor Soyeon seemed so interested in him. Jong's surprise was evident, and as he tried to say something, she stopped him with a cold glance. Leaning in close, she whispered in his ear that if he didn't cooperate, she would tell everything to his mother.